close your eyes and let your mind drift back through the corridors of time, returning to tens of thousands of years ago when Earth was still a pristine, boundless realm of dense primeval forests and colossal creatures. In that profound silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the calls of flocking birds, our ancestors, the prehistoric hunter-gatherers, tread carefully upon a carpet of decaying foliage. For ancient humans, survival was a brutal daily war, and food was not merely a way to fill an empty stomach, it was the sole fuel to sustain existence. In that primitive world, meat provided protein, while nuts and roots offered satiety, but there was one thing considered the ultimate treasure, a kind of liquid gold of the deep woods that every creature craved: honey. The memory of its piercing sweetness, its rich texture, and the explosive burst of energy it delivered was etched deeply into their instincts and DNA. Yet, nature has never bestowed anything for free. To lay their hands upon that sweet golden stream, ancient humans had to face one of nature's most terrifying defensive armies, a swarm of wild forest bees. Imagine a man of the tribe, muscular and unclad, his skin darkened by the sun and wind, crisscrossed with the scars of past encounters with ferocious beasts. He raises the sharp gaze of a hunter toward the towering canopy of ancient trees. Suspended dozens of meters in the air, hanging beneath a massive branch, is a wild beehive as large as a boulder. Giant prehistoric honeybees, significantly larger and far more aggressive than modern domestic bees, blanket the hive in a dark, pulsating mass, forming a living shield that vibrates with the beating of tens of thousands of wings. A low, droning hum echoes steadily, sounding like the warning growl of an invisible monster. The ancient hunter licks his dry, cracked lips. The survival instinct and an overwhelming hunger for energy urge him forward. He possesses no protective gear, no mesh veil, and no thick layers of clothing like modern humans do. His only weapons are sheer audacity, raw muscular strength, and perhaps a torch woven from fresh green leaves, harboring the fragile hope that smoke might pacify the swarm. However, the smoke from a meager bundle of leaves in this unforgiving wilderness is rarely enough to subdue the wrath of tens of thousands of winged warriors. He begins his ascent. His fingers and toes dig fiercely into the rough, jagged bark. As he climbs higher, the buzzing sound grows deafening. The air around the hive thickens, heavy with the cloying scent of sweet nectar mixed with beeswax and the distinct odor of a massive, highly concentrated colony. As he waves a hand to push aside the final leafy branches to reach the golden slab of wax, a minuscule but catastrophic event occurs. Perhaps a dry leaf accidentally brushes against the hive, perhaps a fragile twig snaps, or simply, the acute olfactory senses of the bees detect the unfamiliar scent of the intruder's sweat. A guard bee shoots forth, its speed like an arrow piercing the wind, driving its razor-sharp stinger straight into the hunter's shoulder. That is not just a sting, it is the spark that ignites a devastating catastrophe. When the stinger punctures the hunter's thick skin, a dose of venom loaded with malignant and cell-destroying peptides is instantly pumped into his bloodstream. Pain erupts like a roaring fire beneath the skin, an agonizing, burning sensation that tears through every sensory nerve. But the worst part is not the pain itself. The very moment the stinger embeds into his flesh, the bee releases an alarm pheromone, an invisible chemical signal that spreads through the air at terrifying speed. This signal screams directly to the primal instincts of the entire colony. An enemy is here. Kill! In the blink of an eye, the low droning hum morphs into a piercing, deafening screech. The black living shield upon the hive seems to detonate. Tens of thousands of wild bees erupt from the nest simultaneously, forming a dense, ferocious black cloud that hurls itself directly at the intruder. For the ancient man in this moment, the world appears to collapse. There is absolutely no mercy and nowhere to hide on that towering branch. A torrential rain of toxic stingers begins to pour down upon him. 10, 50, then hundreds of bees violently crash into him. They tangle in his hair, burrow into his ears, and target the most delicate, sensitive areas of his skin: his eyes, lips, nose, and neck. Each new sting releases more pheromones, painting him as a glowing, moving target in the sensory world of the bees, drawing in ever more warriors to the fray. Absolute panic seizes the hunter's mind. His primitive survival instinct overrides any rational thought or calculated strategy. He flails his arms desperately, fruitlessly attempting to swat away the black cloud suffocating his face, but this erratic movement only drives the swarm into a deeper frenzy. Unable to hold his grip on the tree, the hunter lets go. He slips, tumbles, and crashes through sharp, unyielding branches, leaving behind trails of scraped flesh and blood before slamming violently onto the soft, decaying forest floor. Even though the fall leaves his body battered and aching, he does not have a single second to catch his breath. The pitch-black cloud of bees shadows him relentlessly. The hunter springs to his feet, sprinting frantically into the dense, dark undergrowth of the primeval forest. The sound of dry leaves shattering beneath his panicked footsteps intertwines with the roaring buzz of the bees, orchestrating a terrifying symphony of death. He crashes through thorn bushes that shred his skin and stumbles over twisted serpentine roots, but the absolute terror of tens of thousands of venom-laced needles piercing his body makes him completely oblivious to all other wounds. Wild forest bees are among nature's most persistent executioners. They do not give up after a mere few dozen meters. They can pursue an enemy for miles, their fury unyielding until the intruder either collapses or completely vanishes from their sight. During that desperate flight, even worse tragedies can unfold. As the hunter gasps for air with his mouth wide open, frantically trying to supply oxygen to his burning lungs, a few bees might be sucked straight into his throat. A sting inside the airway is the most brutal death sentence for an ancient human. The throat would immediately swell from edema, violently sealing off the passage of air. The hunter would thrash about, clawing wildly at his own neck in agonizing suffocation, before collapsing forever on the moss-covered forest floor. But let us assume our man is more fortunate. He clenches his jaw shut, squeezes one already swollen eye tightly closed, and blindly runs, relying solely on his primal instinct to locate water. Water is his only salvation. And then, after agonizing minutes that stretch into what feels like centuries, a murky river or a muddy swamp appears before his eyes. Without a moment's hesitation, the hunter plunges his battered body into the freezing water, diving deep beneath the surface. The cold water momentarily soothes the burning fiery stings, but the menacing cloud of bees above does not disperse. They circle furiously, skimming the surface of the water, completely enraged and ready to attack anything that dares to emerge. The ancient man lies submerged, his chest tight, his heart pounding erratically as if trying to shatter his ribcage. The sensation of suffocation slowly creeps in. His brain screams for oxygen, but he knows that the moment he breaches the surface, hundreds of toxic stingers will once again bury themselves in his flesh. He must hold his breath to the absolute biological limits of human endurance, occasionally darting up to expose a tiny fraction of his face just to snatch a rapid gulp of air, before plunging back into the depths, carrying with him a few fresh, searing stings on the crown of his head. It takes a very long time before the alarm pheromones finally dissipate into the air and the swarm's patience is exhausted, prompting them to scatter and return to guard their hive. Only then does the hunter dare to emerge completely, dragging his exhausted, mangled body onto the muddy bank. The battle for survival now shifts into a second phase, one that is just as fiercely violent on a physiological level: the war within his own body. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of bee stings have pumped a massive load of venom into his circulatory system. His ancient body begins to react violently. His immune system kicks into overdrive, triggering a massive release of histamine that causes his blood vessels to dilate. Across his entire body, from his face, neck, and limbs to his chest, angry, red, swollen welts erupt, radiating a burning heat and a maddening, unbearable itch. His face becomes completely disfigured, his eyes swell shut, reduced to two narrow slits barely capable of perceiving light, and his lips puff out grotesquely as he struggles for every breath. In an era where medicine is entirely non-existent, the hunter's fate is dictated by one thing: his physiological constitution. If he happens to have a severe allergic reaction to bee venom, anaphylactic shock will strike rapidly. His blood pressure will plummet, his heart rate will become weak and erratic, and his respiratory system will spasm violently, preventing him from taking in enough oxygen. Deep in the solitary forest, with no epinephrine and no antihistamines, the man will slip into delirium, convulse, and ultimately draw his last breath, becoming a feast for wild beasts or decomposing back into the earth by the hands of microorganisms. It would be a silent, agonizing death, a devastatingly high price paid for a fleeting craving for sweetness. However, if the hunter possesses a robust immune system and the extraordinary resilience of primitive mankind, he will begin to find ways to save himself. His survival instincts and the inherited wisdom of his ancestors will drive him to drag himself toward the muddy swamps along the riverbank. He will scoop up handfuls of thick, freezing mud and slather it all over his body, paying special attention to the areas with the highest concentration of stings. As this layer of mud dries, it not only cools his skin and soothes the scorching, fire-like burns, but it also creates a protective barrier, preventing other insects from exploiting his swollen wounds. He might chew on certain astringent forest leaves, applying the crushed pulp to his stings in a desperate attempt to draw out the venom, even if the effect is minuscule. Then, as a raging fever begins to set in from the systemic inflammatory response, he must grit his teeth and drag his heavy feet, navigating his way back to the tribe's cave before nightfall descends and the true predators of the forest begin their hunt. When the battered, swollen, and nearly exhausted hunter collapses at the mouth of the cave, the entire tribe will gather around him. Using the most rudimentary healing methods known to them, the shaman, or the elder women of the tribe, will use spring water to wash away the mud, meticulously pluck out the remaining stingers embedded in his skin, and massage him with animal fat or secret herbal remedies to help him endure a life-or-death fever that will last for days. During those delirious nights of fever, his agonizing groans will echo against the stone walls, serving as a vivid warning, a terrifying lesson ingrained into the minds of every member of the tribe, especially the young children. This horrifying attack by wild bees is not merely an isolated personal tragedy. It plays a pivotal role in the cognitive and cultural evolution of ancient humanity. Through such bloody and agonizing experiences, primitive humans slowly learned to respect and fear the devastating power of nature. They understood that sheer brute strength could never defeat an army of tens of thousands of venom-laced needles. From the stories told around the flickering campfire, from the crude cave paintings depicting dark, swirling clouds of bees and fleeing men, the intellect of ancient humans began to be stimulated, searching for solutions. They gradually realized that smoke could disrupt the bees' communication system, masking the alarm pheromones and rendering them lethargic. They began to craft thicker torches from damp grass and fresh leaves to generate dense, billowing smoke. They learned to drape themselves in thick animal hides and weave protective masks from tree bark before daring to scale the trees to approach the colossal hives once again. Thus, the image of an ancient human being brutally attacked by a swarm of wild bees is not just a portrait of the wild, merciless reality of prehistoric survival. It is a monumental milestone marking the great transformation of humanity. From creatures that acted purely on instinct and were ruthlessly punished by nature, we use that very pain, death, and fear to sharpen our minds, invent tools, and develop complex tactics. Every bloody bee sting that sank deep into the flesh of that ancient hunter was a painful but absolutely necessary stepping stone, propelling humanity out of the darkness of ignorance, teaching us to master nature, and paving the way for us to rise as the dominant species of this planet. And even today, that golden, sweet honey we so effortlessly enjoy still carries within it the echoes of those life-or-death battles fought tens of thousands of years ago, where our ancestors had to pay with their blood, their tears, and their very lives in the heart of the unforgiving wilderness.